On October 18th, 1987, a group of teenagers decided to spend Halloween weekend in the old Ridgemont Cemetery on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. It was meant to be a harmless dare spend the night among the gravestones and film everything for proof. They arrived at dusk, their video camera, the only light in the gathering darkness. The four friends Marcus, Sarah, Kevin, and Jessica set up their tent between two large mausoleums, laughing nervously as the sun dipped below the horizon. Around midnight, Marcus was reviewing footage on the camera's small screen when he noticed something in the background of one shot. "Guys, look at this," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. In the frame, standing perfectly still between two tombstones about 50 yards away, was the silhouette of a man. But this wasn't an ordinary man. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and his face seemed to be stretched impossibly wide. Marcus zoomed in on the face, and all four friends fell silent. The man's mouth was open, not just open, but stretched from ear to ear and in a grotesque, impossible grin. His eyes were black, completely black, like two voids staring directly at the camera. "It's probably just someone trying to scare us," Kevin said, but his voice lacked conviction. They all felt a palpable dread that seemed to seep into their bones. Sarah suggested they pack up and leave immediately, but Jessica insisted on walking around the cemetery to look for whoever was pulling the prank. Marcus kept the camera rolling as they ventured out into the darkness, their flashlights cutting through the thick fog that had begun to roll in. They found nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone ever being there. Yet as they returned to their tent, Marcus continued scanning through the footage. The figure appeared in shot after shot, sometimes standing closer, sometimes farther away, but always with that same impossible smile. In one frame, it was near the tent entrance. In another, it seemed to be standing directly behind Jessica as she walked. But on the actual night, none of them had seen anything. The camera had caught something their eyes could not. Around 2 a.m., Jessica woke up screaming. She was pointing at something outside the tent, her voice raw with terror. Through the transparent fabric, they could all see it. A massive silhouette, standing motionless just 10 feet away. Its head was tilted at that same sickening angle, and even in the darkness, they could swear they saw the outline of that terrible smile. Kevin grabbed the flashlight and directed it at the figure, but the beam passed right through empty air. The silhouette was gone. Jessica had scratches on her arms, deep scratches, as if something had clawed at the tent from the outside. They left the cemetery that night, abandoning their equipment in their panic. The videotape was later recovered by park rangers. When local police reviewed it, they found something that would haunt the case for decades. In the final frames before the camera was dropped, the figure was standing directly in front of the lens, its face filling the entire screen. The smile stretched so wide that its skin appeared to be tearing. But strangest of all, its lips seemed to be moving, as if speaking directly to whoever was watching. Several weeks later, Sarah was admitted to a psychiatric hospital after going into catatonic shock. When she finally spoke, she described horrible nightmares of the smiling man. He would stand at the foot of her bed, she said, that impossible grin never wavering, communicating with her in a language that was somehow both inside and outside her head. She claimed he was still there, even in the hospital. Doctors found scratches all over her body, similar to the ones Jessica had received, except these scratches kept appearing even while Sarah was under constant supervision. The other three friends refused to discuss the incident publicly. But locals in Portland reported that Marcus developed a severe mental condition where he couldn't stop smiling. His smile became so fixed, so rigid, that it looked almost like a grimace. He was eventually moved to a care facility. Kevin became obsessed with the footage, watching it repeatedly until his family had to forcibly remove him from his home. He currently resides in a treatment facility for psychological disorders. Jessica was the only one who seemed to recover normally, though she never spoke about that night. What's unsettling is that, according to multiple accounts, anyone who has watched the original videotape has reported seeing the smiling man in their dreams. Some claim to wake up with scratches on their bodies. Others report periods of uncontrollable smiling, as if their facial muscles are no longer under their own control. The video footage from that night has never been made public, but it's said to exist in the Portland Police Department's evidence archives. Several investigators who reviewed it requested immediate transfers, with one officer refusing to ever speak about what he saw. To this day, Halloween nights in Ridgemont Cemetery are avoided by locals. Park rangers have reported finding disturbing stick figures arranged in patterns throughout the cemetery, arranged almost as if spelling out a message, though a message in what language, they cannot say. In 1952, the small town of Silver Creek, Montana, became the focal point of one of the most disturbing mass disappearances in American history, a disappearance that was completely erased from official records, only surviving in old newspaper archives and the fragmented memories of those who lived through it. The story begins with Harold Clemens, a railroad worker who had been employed by the Northern Pacific Railway for over 20 years. By all accounts, Harold was a reliable man, quiet and dedicated to his job. But in the autumn of 1952, something changed. He began speaking about a train that no one else could see or find records of. He called it the Midnight Train and claimed it ran through Silver Creek every night at exactly 12:47 a.m., passing through the town for precisely 3 minutes before disappearing into thin air. His supervisor dismissed his concerns, but Harold became increasingly insistent. He showed other workers a watch, a pocket watch, that didn't seem to match any brand he could recall, and claimed it synchronized perfectly with the train's arrival. More disturbingly, he claimed the watch had been given to him by one of the train's passengers. When asked what the passenger looked like, Harold's description was vague and troubling. Like a person, he said, but not quite right. Like someone drew a person from memory but forgot some important details. On October 30th, 1952, Harold walked into the Silver Creek Railway Station at 11 p.m. and told the night operator, Tom Briggs, that he intended to board the midnight train. Tom thought Harold was joking. There were no scheduled trains that night, but Harold just smiled and walked out onto the platform. Tom, disturbed by his colleague's behavior, called Harold's home and spoke to his wife. She was hysterical, revealing that Harold had been acting increasingly strange over the past month, refusing to explain his behavior, but spending hours staring out the window at the railroad tracks. At 12:47 a.m., Tom was still at his desk when the entire station seemed to shudder. He heard the sound of a train whistle, a sound that seemed to come from both very far away and impossibly close at the same time. The whistle was unlike any sound he'd ever heard. It was almost musical, with an unsettling harmonic quality that made his teeth ache. He rushed outside and froze in absolute shock. There, sitting perfectly on the tracks, was a train. But it was like no train Tom had ever seen. The cars seemed to shimmer, almost as if they weren't entirely there, as if they existed in two places at once. The windows were dark, completely dark, and from them, he could somehow sense that they were occupied, filled. Tom watched as a door opened on the middle car, and Harold Clemens walked toward it, his movements stiff and deliberate, almost mechanical. Before boarding, Harold turned and looked directly at Tom. He raised a hand in farewell, and then he climbed aboard. The door closed. At exactly 12:50 a.m., the train released its terrible whistle again and simply ceased to exist. The sound faded, the shimmer dissolved, and the train was gone. Tom immediately reported what he'd seen to his supervisor, who suggested Tom had been working too many night shifts and ordered him to take a week off. But Tom's story had spread. Over the following nights, other railroad workers began showing up at the station, and several claimed they too had seen Harold in the past few days, standing on his porch, walking down Main Street, or watching the trains. But according to Tom and others, Harold had definitely boarded that impossible train. Yet no one could find any record of him leaving town through normal means. Then, on November 6th, the entire situation escalated. More people began reporting sightings of the midnight train. It wasn't just Harold anymore. Other people were claiming that they could see it now, that they'd even seen it pass by their homes. On November 7th, 5 people went missing. Not just missing, they vanished from their homes without a trace, leaving everything behind. Among them were Tom Briggs' sister and her husband. Their house was found completely empty, except for one detail. All the clocks in the house had stopped at exactly 12:47 a.m. The disappearances continued. Within a week, 17 people had vanished from Silver Creek. The town was thrown into chaos, though strangely, the disappearances received almost no media attention outside of local papers. It was as if there was an unspoken agreement among the larger news networks to ignore what was happening. Researchers have since found evidence suggesting that federal authorities were involved in suppressing information about the case. By November 15th, 1952, the disappearances had stopped. No more people vanished. The midnight train was never seen again. But the town of Silver Creek was irrevocably changed. The population had shrunk by nearly 50 people in just 2 weeks. Officially, the town records claim they simply moved away or relocated. But Tom Briggs, one of the few who survived the ordeal and lived until 1993, left behind a journal with a different explanation. According to Tom's journal, the people who boarded the midnight train were not dead, but they weren't alive in the conventional sense either. He wrote about dreams vivid, disturbing dreams, in which he could see the people who had disappeared. They were on a train that was somehow outside time, moving through the darkness in a way that defied geography. They were aware, Tom wrote, still conscious, but trapped. And most disturbingly, Tom noted that several of the disappeared had seemed perfectly content with their fate. They smiled in his dreams, he wrote. Not normal smiles. Smiles that were too wide, too knowing, too absolutely wrong. Several years before his death, Tom Briggs was interviewed by a paranormal researcher named Dr. Samuel Haverford. In that interview, Tom revealed something that had haunted him his entire life. He had received a pocket watch, identical to the one Harold Clemens had shown him. The watch had simply appeared in his home on his nightstand one morning. He never discovered how it got there or who left it. Most disturbingly, the watch was still perfectly synchronized with the exact time the midnight train would have arrived had it continued to run. Tom claimed that on several occasions, particularly near the anniversaries of the disappearances, he would find himself drawn to the railroad station at 12:47 a.m., and only through sheer force of will could he resist getting on the platform. Tom died in 1993 at the age of 74, but not before instructing his son to destroy the pocket watch. His son, however, kept it. According to recent reports, the watch still keeps perfect time, and it still attracts people to Silver Creek every November on the anniversary of the first disappearance. Visitors have reported seeing figures on the empty railroad tracks, people who look almost solid, almost real, standing perfectly motionless and watching. And every few years, someone in Silver Creek reports seeing a pocket watch appear in their home. And every person who has ever received one of these watches has eventually moved away from Silver Creek, often suddenly and without explanation, leaving all their possessions behind. In 1978, a photographer named Eleanor Vance discovered something in her darkroom that would consume the rest of her life and eventually drive her to the edge of sanity. Eleanor had been a photographer for over 30 years, working primarily as a wedding and portrait photographer in Boston. She was skilled, well-respected, and known for her meticulous attention to detail. But in March of 1978, she developed a photograph that she had no memory of taking. The photograph showed a man standing in front of what appeared to be an old, dilapidated house. He was unremarkable in appearance, medium height, thin build, dressed in clothes that seemed to belong to no particular era. His face was pale and expressionless, staring directly into the camera with an unsettling intensity. What was most disturbing about the photograph was that Eleanor had absolutely no record of taking it. It was on film from one of her cameras, developed in her darkroom, but she could not recall ever photographing this man or this location. Convinced she was simply having a lapse in memory, Eleanor dismissed the photograph and filed it away. But 3 days later, she discovered another photograph in her darkroom that she had no memory of taking. This one showed the same man, standing in what appeared to be a different location, a street corner in an unfamiliar part of the city. Again, Eleanor had no recollection of taking this photo, yet there it was, appearing on her film. Over the next month, Eleanor discovered 8 more photographs. Each one showed the same man in a different location, sometimes indoors, sometimes outside, but always staring directly at the camera with that same unsettling expression. Eleanor began to panic. She consulted with other photographers, who assured her that it was impossible for her film to contain images she hadn't taken, yet the photographs continued to appear. By the end of April, Eleanor had collected 23 images. Then, on May 3rd, 1978, Eleanor was driving through the South End district when she saw him. The man from the photographs was standing on a street corner, exactly as he appeared in one of the images. Eleanor's heart began racing. She stopped her car, fumbled for her camera, and took a photograph. But when she looked back at the corner, the man was gone. The street was empty. When Eleanor developed this new photograph, the one she had deliberately taken, she discovered something that made her question her sanity. In the developed image, the man was standing on the street corner, but he was not alone. Behind him, barely visible in the background, was Eleanor herself, standing with a camera. It was as if the man had somehow anticipated Eleanor's arrival and had been photographed while she was photographing him, except Eleanor had taken the photograph from across the street, a location where no one could have been standing behind the man without Eleanor noticing. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's life began to unravel. She became obsessed with the mysterious man in the photographs. She traced the locations of each image, visiting them to see if she could find any additional information. At each location, she felt a strange sense of dread, as if the air itself was somehow wrong. Several people she spoke to claimed to have seen a man matching the description standing in those exact spots, sometimes for hours at a time, just staring at nothing. But when asked to describe him more fully, they could provide no additional details. It was as if looking at him caused people's memories to become distorted and incomplete. In July of 1978, Eleanor received a package in the mail. There was no return address, no postage stamps. It was simply left on her doorstep. Inside the package was a photograph. Eleanor knew immediately that she had not taken this photograph, and yet it appeared on film from one of her cameras. The image showed Eleanor herself, standing in her darkroom, holding up one of the mysterious photographs. She was looking directly into the camera with an expression of absolute terror on her face. But the strangest part was that the Eleanor in the photograph was wearing clothes that Eleanor had not owned in 1978, clothes that wouldn't exist for several years. Eleanor called the police, but they were unable to investigate what seemed to be a serious crime. The photographs provided no evidence of anything illegal, and there was no way to prove that Eleanor had not taken them herself. Detective James Mitchell, who took her initial report, suggested that Eleanor might be suffering from a psychological break and recommended she seek psychiatric help. But before Eleanor left the police station, Detective Mitchell pulled her aside privately and confessed something that had been troubling him. He had been investigating a series of disappearances that had been occurring in Boston over the past 5 years. 4 people had vanished without a trace, each of them last seen on the street corners where Eleanor had found the mysterious photographs. He'd never been able to find any connection between the disappearances. The victims were different ages, different occupations, different social backgrounds. But now, he wondered if there was a connection. He showed Eleanor the missing persons files, and in each case, people had reported seeing a man standing on those exact corners in the days before the disappearances. Some witnesses described him as appearing extremely pale, almost ghostly. All of them noted that his expression never changed, and that looking at him made them deeply uncomfortable. Eleanor left the police station in a state of shock. That night, she went through all of her photographs, hundreds of them, taken over her 30-year career. As she carefully examined each image, she began to notice something that made her blood run cold. In the background of photographs taken over many years, in the corners and shadows, in the barely visible areas that she had never paid close attention to, she could see him, the same man, standing perfectly still, watching. Sometimes his image was so faint that it might have been dismissed as a shadow or a trick of light. But once Eleanor began noticing him, she couldn't stop seeing him. She found him in wedding photographs taken in 1962. She found him standing among the trees in a garden portrait from 1970. She found him reflected in a shop window in a street photography series from 1973. He was there, always on the periphery, always watching, always with that same emotionless expression. The horrifying implication was clear. The man had been appearing in her photographs for at least 16 years without her conscious knowledge. Eleanor's mental state deteriorated rapidly. She became convinced that the man was not physically present when the photographs were taken, but rather that he was somehow able to insert himself into her images from some other place, some other reality. She theorized that he was a creature that existed partially outside of normal space, that photographs were a kind of doorway through which he could communicate, and that taking his photograph documenting his existence was somehow connecting her to him in a way that was inescapable. In December of 1978, Eleanor attempted to destroy all of her photographs. She burned them in her fireplace, watching as decades of work turned to ash. But the very next morning, she discovered that several of the mysterious photographs, the ones she had desperately tried to burn, were sitting on her darkroom counter, completely undamaged. The handwriting on the back of each photograph was Eleanor's own. The note said things like, "Please don't destroy these. I need to remember, and these are so important. Please keep them safe." Eleanor had no memory of writing these notes, but the handwriting was unmistakably hers. She contacted a handwriting expert, who confirmed that the notes were written in Eleanor's hand. When asked if it was possible that she had written them while in some kind of altered state, the expert could not rule it out. But Eleanor was adamant that she had never written them. In 1979, Eleanor checked herself into a psychiatric hospital. She told the doctors that she believed something was trying to take over her mind, something that was using her skill with photography as a way to anchor itself to the world. She described horrible nightmares in which she could see through the man's eyes, see the world in a fragmented, distorted way, as if reality itself was breaking apart. She described the sensation of losing her agency, of feeling her own hands moving without her conscious control, raising a camera and taking photographs of things she did not remember seeing. Eleanor remained in the psychiatric hospital for 3 years. While she was there, no new mysterious photographs appeared. But curiously, several hospital staff members reported that they had found photographs in the hospital's darkroom photographs that had not been there before. These photographs showed various patients and staff members, all of them looking directly into the camera with expressions of absolute terror. In the background of each photograph, barely visible, was a pale figure with an emotionless face. The hospital destroyed all of the photographs and refused to discuss the incident publicly. But Eleanor's psychiatrist, Dr. Robert Hartley, kept detailed notes about her case. In these notes, he documented Eleanor's increasingly lucid periods, during which she would beg him to understand the truth about what was happening to her. She claimed that the man in the photographs was not a person, but something that used photography to communicate across dimensions. She theorized that he had chosen her, perhaps randomly, as a conduit, and that once he had established contact through the photographs, he could never be truly separated from her. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Hartley noted that Eleanor claimed the man was not trying to hurt people, but rather,